Welcome back, and we're getting ready to move into our first conversation for today, and that is with representatives of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Belize. We have with us Nikita Usher, who is the president, and Marcello, who is the treasurer. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Well, gentlemen, of course, the topic for today is looking at the financial situation of the country. We are about a month away from the reading of the budget to be presented by the government of Belize. And we know that the private sector was a part of the consultations leading up to that budget presentation. So I want to start off just finding out what your initial reactions are to what the situation, that government has presented to you all.
Well, Lady, thanks for the invite today. I want to start off with saying that I think we live in a Belize that all of us would know where we are today. I believe that the government on Thursday last week presented to us, and I'll use their words, an imperiled situation that they have. The problem that we face now, imperiled economy, is what the terms that they used. The problem that we are now is that we have a deficit that we need to try and bridge. And if you were to use the words of others, we're in a position right now where the government cannot afford to meet their debts. That's where we are. And how do we get out of that? How do we bridge that? The chamber has sat down long before the consultations came. And we have been engaging with a number of stakeholders to try and remedy our way out. But the premise on which we want to start on is what's typical of a government in a situation like this is always to say, easiest way, raise the taxes. And the Chamber's position has always maintained, and we've always said in every document that we've produced and any recession that we've gone to, we don't feel that there's a need to increase taxes. We feel that there are other ways of doing it without going at first and foremost taxes.
Let me start off. I know you keep in good contact with your membership, and one of the things, even before the presentations, we've been speaking about being a country in recession for a while. What are your members saying at this point in terms of how the economy is functioning? What is the current purchasing power of the people in the country? Are we seeing the slowing down as has been predicted or has been continuously said in a more general way?
You're in that sector, you answer.
For us, the recession happened long before it was officially recognized. Let's put it that way. Because we in the business community have been feeling the pinch for some time. I mean, we've seen quite recently the rising costs in fuel. So all of those are a part of what makes business more expensive. And so recession started long before. And so most businesses have been trying to cope with all the factors that they're having to deal with currently.
Don't add it to that though, you have to also realize that what our general public has now done is to find the plight of the dollar. We have now moved away from our own Belize and find the Melchers, the Chetomals, to try and find the goods that they need, perhaps at a cost that is less than what it is for in Belize. But one has to understand the impact of that on Belize's economy. And perhaps one of these, when we did that, we actually explained to government how that impacted government. The last check that we did with the Mexican embassy showed that we are about 750,000 visits per year into Chetomal. I'm just using Chetomal, I'm not using even Melchor. And I'm supposed that it will not be much less than that per year. If you were to calculate that and say, assuming every one person spends $50 US, and I know it's more than that, but let's use that number for argument's sake.
That is your
and you
minimum.
do the math, that's your minimum. And you use that number to say, what has the Belize economy lost? We have lost, from a government standpoint, we have lost the 12.5% GST. That is gone because that dollar that was being spent outside is not being spent locally, and so there is no GST attached. You've also lost the 1.75% business tax that business would have had to file at the end of the month. And that number adds up. The last check we did, it was in the millions. So that in itself tells you that we have serious issues on our hands.
Now, looking at, and I really want us to have enough time to focus on your recommendations. Looking at the situation of the economy, what we expect to be presented, while perhaps will be a more grim picture than we saw last year or the year before, has not been, it's not going to be a big variation from what we have been seeing for so many years. We're importing more than we're exporting. We are spending more than we can afford. And the deficit has been there. And the economy isn't growing at the rate that we need it to grow. So how do you take into consideration the fact that this has been a problem that we have continuously and consistently been facing each budget cycle, and put forward recommendations that will actually be the catalyst for a change?
Well, before we even start on a catalyst for a change, there has to be the individual's willingness to change. It starts from that standpoint.
Individual Belizeans, individual government
I'm
leaders?
going to go at leaders first.
Okay.
There has to be that first catalyst to say that we are in a problem and we are now consulting. I will want to say that as I commented at the last session of the consultation, the last consultation that was done with private sector was about 2005?
Something like that.
2005. So every other budget that has been done since then, there has been little or no consultation at all, well, at least for the chamber, I'm speaking for. And so we saw this opportunity as a welcoming one to at least know you're admitting, and then I use the term that they used earlier, imperiled economy. It's their words. That tells me now that you're in a stage now where you're accepting. As Marcello said earlier, the recession was long before they even accepted that there was one. But what we did was to approach it from the standpoint that what would the business community want to see in a budget that we know will be heavily burdened? But we feel that we can get out, for the most part, without living taxes. The words of the FinSec was that we need to bridge about 3% of GDP, which is about plus or minus $200 million. What did the chamber do? The chamber felt that if you have an economy, and your words were, we're spending more than we can afford, then we start at that point. What is the cost of the government today? When you look at the government budgets, their revenues seemingly is running pretty close to what they had forecasted, but their expenditures outrageous, outrageously higher than what they had projected. That is why you see on a consistent basis supplementary allocations coming to the House, asking for the House to approve. It's because they had approved the budget in the House, they have spent more than they had asked for, and now you have to go back to the House. So let's start at that point. Let's start at where, and that's what the chamber started with, where in your expenditures listing lines you have to look at decreasing. It has to be cut.
Now, the biggest fear when you talk about cutting government expenditures is, and we,
Labor.
those of us who can remember the retrenchment, I can't remember the year right now, but I know we know what we're talking about. We have heard the recommendations from IMF year after year. Cut down on public wages. We hear this still being a consistent recommendation, and the biggest fear is that people will lose jobs. Is that what you're talking about?
That's a very good one. It depends on, we are talking expenditures, but since you brought that one, an interesting component to that is, what is the value of wages, employment costs in the government coffers today? It's about 60% is what I think I saw in the 60% of your expenditures are employment-related costs, whether it be transfers, whether it be pension, whether it be direct remuneration to employees. That's a consideration. I don't know that the business sector can observe a retrenchment at this point in time. However, that's a decision for the politicians. We look more at, let's talk ministries. We're in a small country. Why do we need so much ministries?
Consolidation.
Consolidation of the ministries. redeployment of staffing,
retraining, retooling persons to put into ministries where they wouldn't ordinarily work, but because there's a understaffing, as they put it, in certain ministries, that you need the extra manpower there.
Look at the, and I'll deal with one for you. Customs and immigration. And I'm not saying to consolidate that, but I'm saying to you that we have informal trade across so many border points. Halakte, wide open. We have the infrastructure, but there's no personnel in there. So these people pretty much crosses the border, and we're losing revenues from that.
You know, it's so interesting that you bring these up, because for me, I feel like we're just always in a very reactive state in our country. We're just always reacting to the mess, the blunder, instead of having foundational solutions that fill these gaps that are obviously gaping wide open, like the fact that we have too many ministries, and you just mentioned Halakte. How do you even approach a situation where there are fundamental things that need to be settled? Because I feel that with our government, our system, the system is completely up and down. Exactly. So where do you start in terms of the foundation, and so that when we're moving forward, we don't always have to be in this reactive state?
Enforcement, internal controls. That's the starting base. We have to correct those things first, and then the other things will come.
So you have classified it as looking at the leakage within government at this point in time.
We did a three-prong approach.
Yes.
We took first and foremost the expenditure side. Let's look at government's expenditures. Belizean public has, and I say Belizean public because that's what we do in the house. We have gifted the government with $1 billion. We need to know, how did you spend that?
Right.
We can't see another day where you can come to us and say you're going to increase taxes without accounting to us and say, I had $1 billion last year, this is what we did with it. We can improve it, yes, and that's what we want to see. So if there's going to be austerity, it has to be shared. It can't be just the Belizean public coming to a business community. And we all know, when it comes to the business community, generally, it's going to be the public to bear. So we can't just come and say we want those taxes to go there without showing where you have also done some austerity on your own. So we did a three-prong. One was the expenditure. We then looked at the revenue side, which is what you referred to, the leakages. We looked at revenue from the standpoint of what revenues are now, and is there any place where you can see improvement to that without looking at how do you improve even beyond what you have as taxes beyond that. So we did that second tour, and then we did a third prong where we said, in doing all that, we must not forget that there has to be a stimulation of economic growth inside your economy. If you don't have economic growth, then your taxes are going to be bleak. So those are the three-prong approach that we took, and we had somewhat details in each one of the sections. So that's where we are.
I want to start off with the looking at increasing revenue and the potential for new taxes. We had Financial Secretary Joe Waite say to the media that it is definitely a possibility. We don't have official confirmation, but we have been hearing this. Some talks are about fuel tax, some talks are about looking at GST. Now, the business, the private sector and other social sectors have pointed out that they really feel this is not the way to go, that the Belizean public cannot handle the burden of increased taxes. But you guys are businessmen. We need more money as a nation. What are your recommendations in terms of being able to grow the economy or to increase revenue without putting the direct burden on the Belizean public?
Start now, buddy. There you go.
The GST has been the one that I think is a top of mind for a lot.
Yeah.
That potential increase, as the recommendation from the IMS says, take it to 15%. But there's so many others that aren't actually paying their fair share of taxes. I mean, we need to be able to all be in on the same playing field. Everybody has to pay their fair share of taxes so that then the burden doesn't fall on the small group that is paying. And so that's one way. I mean, I mentioned earlier manpower, going back to retooling and retraining, and then basically transferring persons to the departments that require the additional manpower. Revenue collection, revenue administration is a very big part of the leaking that is occurring within the government system.
Can you consider development in the revenue stream? Because I'm thinking with the private sector, I don't know what the relationships between the private sector and the government seems very strange. You said that the last time that there was even consultations was in 2005.
I believe it's 2005.
Moving forward, how do you see a public-private partnership coming, being a catalyst for a revenue stream? Like, for instance, the building of infrastructural roads where you have a toll, or even subcontracting certain services, public utility services out to private companies. How would that play into maybe moving forward?
Well, let me say this to you, and I'll throw a number so that you understand. And I'll use the example of Marcello. GST right now in this country in arrears is about 100 million is what I believe it is. Probably maybe a little bit more. I'm rounded numbers here. If you have $100 million in arrears today, and then you have land tax, which is about $108 million. Remember what I said earlier about what was our deficit, right? And we're not talking business tax yet, which is in arrears as well. Now, first and foremost, you are to have some sort of a system to develop. How are you going to get these taxes collected? Are they legitimate? Have they been aging? Because some of them might be statute bar already. We don't know if the Auditor General's report only quote numbers. It didn't say whether these are aging for 5 years, 10 years, because after a certain period it's statute bar. So, but you're still carrying them on your books to say that you have them outstanding. Has there been any effort to try and collect this? We feel, and this is where the retooling comes in, we don't feel that there's sufficient administration of the tax. It's the easiest place to go to a Grace Kennedy, who has a structure in place to go and make sure that Grace Kennedy pays what is fair to them. However, we know, you know, that all of us go to certain places to purchase and you don't have a receipt, and therefore where's the obligation to file that tax into the system? That is where the chamber is standing on. We are saying to you that there are sufficient business houses out there that are probably not paying their full and fair share of the tax. We also looked at, so that is one angle. You need to look at how do you collect what is outstanding. You asked us about improvement of revenue. You used the example of GST. We felt that there are other places. We don't feel that the Belizean public should be bearing such costs. We have now become one of the renowned places to be from a touristic standpoint. We saw, braggingly, cruise tourism reaching 1 million people. Well, if 1 million people wants to come to Belize, then it means that 1 million people will be prepared to pay to come to Belize. Right now you're charging $10 head tax. We're recommending that should be taken to $20 head tax. Honestly speaking, and I'm not in the tourism sector, but from all information we have received, the expenditures at tourism at the cruise level is not in the same as those that comes over for overnight stay. So a $10 increase, that's not a burden to the Belizean public, but it's increasing your revenue stream. That's another way how we felt that we could do that. We looked at border tax. We discussed the Chetomal-Melcher issue.
Yes.
Yes, it was done some years ago, and yes, it was perhaps a political nightmare for the government. I don't know. I wasn't there. But we are telling you that if you want to stimulate the purchases locally, to keep it in Belize's economy, to make sure that you get back your GST and your business tax, then let's start and put in a border tax. Not to tell the persons that you can't go over the border, but it dissuades those who think that they have to pay a minimal fee of $10 at the border point. You're departing Belize, you pay $10 at the border point, and that's $10. But the Chamber's position has been, in our recommendation, all those revenues we do not want to go in quotes to the consolidated fund. It has to go to settle specific depths. Those are some of the recommendations that we have looked at.
In other words, you don't want it to get lost in a
That's
general
correct.
fund, and we already have issues with detailed accountability
That's correct.
on spending.
That's correct.
Now, let me ask the question in terms of what the chamber and the private sector are doing internally. And I believe in a past conversation, we spoke about the private sector's involvement in some of these very same leakages that we talk about. The business houses that you talk about that don't provide receipts. In other words, we don't know that they're accountable to pay their GST. People who get duty exemptions that perhaps are not necessary for the type of work that they do, the type of incentives that some business houses are able to get. They are a part of, maybe not your direct membership, but they are a part of your sector. So what are you doing internally to be able to stimulate your own members and the people within your sector to also be accountable to the rest of the country and citizens, that the process is fair and equitable?
I like when you put me on the spot in those type of situations, and you rightfully noted it as well. They might not be your members. Remember, we are reaching out to our membership, and we have always been advocating for a fair and equitable tax. So all our members are well acquainted with what we're fighting for. If they are not in that boat, they would have tendered a resignation from the chamber from day one. Now, we don't feel, honestly speaking, that it's the membership of the chamber that is having those issues. We feel, and all of us know where those are happening. I think even the government is aware of it. Now, I want to make sure that I'm going to run with the suggestion that Marcello made. Remember, the IMF made a suggestion of a 2.5% increase on the GST. Bear in mind that if you increase 2.5% and there's no improvement in your administration, it will only be 2.5% on top of what you're getting now. Those who are leaking or who are avoiding or who are not paying the taxes, you have just made them 2.5% richer. So we got to be careful how we're treading to increase the tax. That has been the chamber's position. You will not yield what you're expecting to get from an increase in the tax, except the burden of those who are buying. They will pass it on to consumers, but they will not pass it on to government. Meaning when they've collected it, that will not be going to government. Or minimally, they will do so. So you have to, that is why we are
So
saying...
that's why you're going back to retrieving what is owed and ensuring that all businesses are functioning the way they should, with the accountability back to government and with the revenues going into...
No, I will add one more though, and in fairness to the government on this side, you asked the question earlier about the interaction of private sector, public sector. We have also been championing for a new account system. Amalgamation, we talk about departments. Why do you need to have a business tax department and a GST tax department? There should be one department called tax revenues. That's what it is. You could have a different account, but one. The government has been in conversation and has heeded to some of the concerns that we have raised with regards to that. And they've been looking at a change program. We've seen a demo on what they're looking at, where it's going to be able to amalgamate. It's a one-tin numbers type system. When you come in, you can track that person from entry at customs all the way through to. So that has been one of the discussion, but that won't be affecting this year's budget here. It's going to be another 18 months before you see that kind of rolled out. They're still searching at programs, looking at potential consultants to do it. We've seen one so far, looks good, but that is not the end of that. So on that side, I will give them credits for that.
Now, getting to the point about talking about stimulating economic growth, and we have heard people travel outside of the country to Chatamal, to Melchora, because they're cheaper prices and more variety in terms of able to access. So ideally, you speak about wanting people to spend their money home, but it's not that what they need or can afford is accessible to them. Let's talk about how you would suggest that can be done. and add to it that yes, we know you have spoken many times about focusing on small businesses, and being able to have more persons start their own businesses, but it's very costly as well. So let's talk about how you can balance these, what your suggestion is to balance these.
First and foremost, I'll tell you one of the reasons why you use the example of Chetumal. Do you know that Chetumal's GST is higher than Belize's GST? Chetumal's GST rate is about 16%. Belize is still at 12.5%. But yet, their goods are cheaper there than you could buy it here in Belize. Why? Import duties. There has to be an active role by the government to reduce your import duties and exchange, if you want to exchange it with GST as you're recommending, after of course you have streamlined. But the import duties in Belize are too high. You cannot stimulate an economy with an import duty level at which it is right now. In some goods case, they're paying import duty, environmental tax, RRD. Adds up to close to about, I think in some instances, 70%. That's not the case.
The cost of the product is already almost double.
That's correct.
Before you add profit to sell to.
And then GST is paid on top of those landed costs.
Yeah.
So one has to imagine that. Guatemala's GST is, I think it's 15 or 14, thereabout. But their import duty is tremendously lower than Belize. That has to be. Now, you might then ask me, then how are you recommending to change your import duties, and you're asking me to improve? That is why I said earlier, you have to then look at how do you revenue neutral that. I'll move this off, but I'll increase in one area. It makes the goods cheaper. From the economic standpoint of growth, where we want to go, we looked at several areas. Agro-productive sector. There's one in there that 99% of the agro-productive sectors, whatever they produce, goes out of this country. Because we have a population of only 300,000 people, or 350. They can't observe the production of what you do here. But yet, every single input that is needed for that agro-productive sector business to succeed is dutied and taxed. So when our Belize product leaves Belize, the doors of Belize, it's already at a disadvantageous position because it is leaving Belize filled with good product, but filled with government taxes on top of it. When it gets into the shelves in CARICOM, the CARICOM sister states, they don't have any duties on their production. So you're matching up a product that comes from Belize with a product that's made in Barbados, and you're already $2 less. There has to be a removal of inputs into the agro-productive sector, and it affects all. Let's take, you're talking about small businesses. Let's take the issue of packaging. That has a tax, that has a duty. 5 years now, the chamber has been lobbying to remove packaging tax. That will allow the small man on the street that is selling a little bottle of juice or a little bottle of something that has his product now at a more affordable rate that Belizeans can afford, and perhaps even go outside of Belize.
So we hear quite a number of suggestions at this point, and I want to ask in terms of the going back to the consultations with government. What is your sense in terms of how open they are in this process for consultations? They met with the private sector. They also met with the unions. And, you know, I think it was very right for you to point out that this has been a process that hasn't taken place for a long time, which you can appreciate. But what was the sense in the consultation about whether or not they are looking for recommendations or simply presenting to you what will most likely be the case in March?
We're hopeful that it's not just a talk shop, and that in fact what is being tabled by all those who they've met with, not just the business community, is going to be seriously considered, because at the end of the day, the change has to happen now. We are already seeing where we've come from, where we're headed, and unless we are able to make those adjustments and corrections now, basically we're just leaving ourselves to continue down the same path we're going now.
Can I ask, has there been any recommendation put forward to public servants? I think that you mentioned earlier that internal controls is something that needs to be addressed, the system within itself, because a lot of these things are coming from a place of internal restructuring that needs to happen. Is there any leverage that can be garnered within the system itself, the people who work there, to be a part of that catalyst for change?
Well, part of our consultation also included we work very closely with the PSU and the
APSSM.
Okay. So a lot of that discussion was held with them. I will tell you that one of the discussion held also was, and I didn't say it in the earlier parts of cost cutting when you mentioned the retrenchment, but we were more looking at the side of pension and the retirement age. We're retiring people at 55 and then we hire them back on contract. And so that has been one of the discussions that we have also had.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the minute you mentioned the unions, the issue came back to my mind. A while back when the unions were trying to settle their CBA, one of the points that they kept on pushing for was getting a full list of contract workers that are currently working for government. And we know the situation where sometimes there's an office established. And if we look at the legal situation specifically, that's one of the easiest ones to go to. There's an office established to do certain work, but we contract persons outside to be able to do it.
Correct.
Is that also a part of the recommendations that you're looking at? It's something that we continuously hear about, but we haven't seen or gotten any word from government whether or not they will seriously look at contract workers, what they're getting paid, whether they're necessary, whether some of the work that they're doing should actually be done through the ministries that are funded.
Yes, that came up. I will tell you that the unions particularly use that as their leverage point. Because they had more access to the information than we did.
Yeah.
So they kind of did that. The issue of the pension for us, we felt that, and we work in private sector, so for us pension has been one that I don't know of a pension that is a fully paid pension by the firm. I know of contributory pensions. And so we are saying to government that at some point you have to break that continuously paying a full pension plan. And new entrants has to understand that it has to be a contributory type of pension scheme, which will reduce your costs. And so these are areas that we have looked at, and that's why I didn't want to go to that side of a retrenchment, because we feel that there are other areas that you can fix before you actually get to that. But indeed, contract workers listing was a topic of discussion with the unions.
Now, if I were to ask you if you had the opportunity to sit in on the finalization of the budget presentation, and you were given the opportunity to point out one priority action from your recommendations to be included, what would it be?
That would be a difficult call. There will be so many.
It's an opportunity.
But there has to be one from each side. That's what I would ask for. I would ask for one from the revenue, one from the growth side, and one from the expense side. From the growth side, I will say to you that private sector needs market opening. Private sector doesn't need, all we need is a system that facilitates a process to follow. Changing in your import duties would help, but a market environment that is open up for Belize. Belize is blocked in so many ways. Neighboring country like Mexico we can trade with because we have no trade agreement. Now I heard former director of trade discussing that on one of the shows earlier this week. It's been 5 years that we've been discussing the Mexican trade. Guatemala, we have a partial scope working. I saw cattle going across only yesterday for the first time.
Cattle?
Cattle, I might have thought. We have the Salvadorian
but how competitive can we be?
If we change import duties, we can. we are already being competitive. We have the demands for those products coming over. That's where shrimp got its start in Mexico. We're seeing cattle going, because we don't have a free trade agreement with Mexico, it goes through Guatemala and then heads up the north border and then it gets into Mexico. It's Belizean cattle, when we could avoid all of that. So there's a demand for it. But we don't have a market that is making it happen.
Okay.
On the cost side, I would say to you that government seriously needs to look at their overall cost. I think labor cost is one. We have to get those contract workers. We have to look at the pension.
I want to close off with one question because we're quickly running out of time. And it is looking at, I think if we are to be very honest with ourselves and look in the mirror and look at what our individual contributions are, as well as the expectations we have of leaders in different sectors, we have to be honest about what we can do to help the situation, the financial situation that this country is in. So if the business community were to look themselves in the mirror, what is something that you need to do internally to be able to, other than provide recommendations as to what government can do, what can you do internally to be able to help be a part of the change of what we've become accustomed to with our financial situation?
You want to start?
It's not that hard a question.
Promoting adherence to the law.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. At the end of the day, all of us who are paying taxes and those who aren't, generally, need to be doing the same. And we're not saying just chamber members. It has to be the wider community, the business community, that is actually doing their fair share to add their 5-10 cents into the bucket to ensure that we get out of the area that we're in now.
I think all sectors has to pick up their portion of the, and I have to agree with Marcello, adherence to the law is key for us. Every single sector has to pick up their portion of the tax. It cannot be a tax that is only going to be taxing a sector and other sectors are getting away. You use examples of incentives being offered to certain businesses and you question whether or not that is, and I agree with you. We've had recommendations in there.
Some are necessary, but not all.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so I think fairness and equitable distribution of the resources has to be the name game. We'll be the first to be on a campaign to try and stimulate payment of taxes because you have to pay your fair share, but it has to be enforced to the point where it's equitable and across the entire sector, all sectors.
Okay.
We must pay our share.
Well, thank you for coming in and sharing with us really just an overview of your recommendations. You have put these out to your members at this point.
Yes.
And what would be the next step for you? You've submitted it to government.
We have submitted to government. I understand that government will be making their last rounds this week. I don't know if we'll be called back for any consultation on the matter. We've asked for that because we want to be involved in that process. As you rightfully put it, it's whether or not it's just to say that you did a consultation or not. But we honestly feel that it's a good start. We have asked them to come back to the table in 3 months or in 6 months to review again, as opposed to just saying the die has been cast and final. We're saying to them taxes should be held at this point in time while we try and engage in some of these recommendations.
So you have firmly indicated to the government that you do not support any increase in GST?
We do not support any increase in GST, except if you can show us where you have done your fair share of the austerity, and after doing that, you can say to us that, honestly speaking, we might have to use an increase.
As a segue to our next conversation, we're going to be joined by PAHO, and one of the things that has been happening in other parts of the world is looking at introducing a new tax called the sugar tax. I looked at the situation.
Sin tax.
Well, there's the sin tax for alcohol and tobacco, but this one is talking about sugar products. Is that something that the Chamber has looked at? It is both a health initiative and it is also a stream for revenue as well that can be looked at.
It's a part, right? It's a part of looking at the zero-rated list and coming back to say, okay, right now the basic necessities and what is considered basic food items are being zero-rated, and then you look at the makeup of those, sodium, sugar, all the usual things, and then realize that, you know what, maybe there's a different approach that needs to be taken. Let's look at those healthier options and then zero rate those and then put the zero rated back on the list.
All right.
You know, kind of shifting the mindset. I mean, we're seeing it already within the Belizean society, where a lot more persons have become more aware of the adjustments that they're making to their lifestyle, exercise and what they eat and diets and all of that. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here once again, and I appreciate the response for the segue to the next segment, because next we're going to be talking to PAHO Director and CEO in the Ministry of Health, looking at a working visit that is currently ongoing and the cooperation agreement that they're going to be signing for the next couple of years. So that's the next conversation. We're going to take a break and be back in a few. Stay tuned.